My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter. 3 months ago, my mother introduced me to a room full of strangers as the family's greatest disappointment. 10 minutes later, a crystal champagne glass slipped from another woman's hand and shattered across the marble floor because she had finally recognized who I was. The silence that followed changed everything. I still remember the smell of fresh roses in the ballroom. My younger sister, Lily's engagement party, was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The country club overlooking Lake Michigan had been transformed into something that looked straight out of a bridal magazine. White orchids hung from gold arches. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished floors. Servers walked through the crowd carrying trays of champagne and tiny appetizers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. At least that was what my mother would have said. Because according to her, everything in my life could be measured by what I couldn't afford. I arrived 20 minutes late after finishing a 14-hour shift at St. Matthew Medical Center. A little girl had gone into cardiac arrest during my shift. I had spent nearly an hour helping stabilize her. I wasn't going to leave just because my mother wanted me standing beside my sister for photographs. Saving a child seemed slightly more important. Apparently my mother disagreed. "There she is," she announced loudly the moment I walked through the doors. Several guests turned. I immediately felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach, the one I had felt since childhood whenever my mother looked at me with that particular smile. The smile that meant humiliation was coming. Lily rushed over first. Unlike our mother, she had always tried to be kind. "You made it." "Barely." She hugged me. "You look exhausted." "I am exhausted." "You should have gone home and changed." I glanced down at my navy blue dress. Simple. Professional, nothing special. What was wrong with this? Nothing. But her expression said otherwise. Around us, women wore designer dresses and expensive jewelry. I looked more like someone attending a work conference than a luxury engagement celebration. Honestly, I didn't care. I hadn't attended for fashion. I attended because Lily was my sister. Then my mother appeared. Patricia Carter. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile, and absolutely perfect timing. "There you are." She kissed my cheek without actually touching it, a skill she had mastered years ago. I knew trouble was coming. I just didn't know how much. "Evelyn," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "at least you changed out of your hospital scrubs." A few people laughed politely. I forced a smile. "I came straight from work." "Of course you did." That tone. Always that tone. As if working was somehow embarrassing. My father stood nearby pretending not to notice. That was his specialty. Avoiding conflict, especially when my mother created it. Soon guests began gathering around us, including the people I had heard so much about but never met. The groom's family, Lily's fiancé, Daniel Whitmore, his mother, Margaret Whitmore, his father, Charles, and his younger sister, Rebecca. The Whitmores were wealthy. Old money wealthy. The kind of wealthy that never needed to mention money because everyone already knew. My mother had spent months obsessing over them, buying new clothes, taking etiquette classes, rehearsing conversations, trying desperately to impress people who already seemed perfectly comfortable with themselves. "Margaret," my mother said brightly, taking the older woman's arm, "I'd like you to meet my older daughter." Something in her voice immediately made me nervous. "This is Evelyn." Margaret smiled politely. "It's lovely to meet you." Before I could answer, my mother continued, "Evelyn has always been our unconventional child." The knot in my stomach tightened. "Oh?" Margaret looked curious. My mother laughed. You know the kind. The laugh people use when they're pretending to be affectionate while sharpening a knife. "She never quite fit in with the rest of us." A few guests chuckled. I felt heat rising into my face. "Mom, no, it's true." She waved her hand dismissively. "Lily was always the ambitious one." I blinked. Ambitious? I had spent 12 years becoming a physician, but apparently that didn't count. Evelyn prefers doing her own thing. My father's eyes immediately dropped toward the floor. Coward. Every single time. "What does she do?" Rebecca asked. Before I could answer, my mother beat me to it. "Oh, she works at a hospital." Works at a hospital. Not is a doctor. Not leads a department. Not spent years training. Just works at a hospital. Like she cleaned floors. I stared at her. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. "That's wonderful," Margaret said kindly. "What kind of work?" My mother smiled. The smile. the one I knew too well. Nothing particularly glamorous. A few people laughed again. Someone has to do those jobs. The room suddenly felt very warm. I looked at Lily. She seemed uncomfortable. Good. At least someone was. My mother continued. Evelyn has always preferred service work. Service work. 14 years of medical training reduced to 2 words. I should have interrupted. I should have corrected her. Instead, I froze. Because some wounds never really heal. No matter how successful you become, no matter how many degrees hang on your wall, no matter how many lives you've saved. Sometimes one sentence from your mother can still make you feel like you're 15 years old. Then Margaret Whitmore tilted her head. She was staring at me now, really staring. Something in her expression changed. Confusion, recognition, shock. She took a step closer. Evelyn, I frowned. Yes? The room grew quieter. Margaret's eyes widened. You wouldn't happen to be Dr. Evelyn Carter? My mother laughed. Oh, goodness, no. But Margaret wasn't looking at her anymore. She was looking only at me. And suddenly I knew exactly where I had seen her before. Intensive care unit. 7 months earlier. 3 terrifying nights. A family praying outside a hospital room. A husband fighting for his life. Margaret's face had looked very different then. Tired, terrified, broken. Now it was simply stunned. Oh my God, she whispered. The champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered across the marble floor. Every conversation in the ballroom stopped. Every head turned. My mother's smile disappeared. Margaret never took her eyes off me. You saved my husband's life. The room fell completely silent. For a moment, nobody moved. The sound of shattered crystals still echoed through the ballroom. I could hear dozens of conversations dying mid-sentence around us. My mother looked confused. Margaret Whitmore looked emotional. And I suddenly wished I were anywhere else. You saved my husband's life, Margaret repeated. Her voice trembled slightly. Charles Whitmore stared at me. Then recognition flashed across his face too. My God, he shook his head, it's really her. The entire room was watching now. I could practically feel hundreds of eyes fixed on me. My mother forced a laugh. I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. There isn't. Charles stepped forward. 7 months ago, I was admitted to St. Matthew Medical Center. His voice carried across the room. I had a ruptured aortic aneurysm. Several guests exchanged surprised looks. It happened during a business conference. Margaret nodded. The surgeons told us he probably wouldn't survive the night. My stomach tightened. I remembered every detail. The emergency surgery, the blood loss, the panic, the endless hours. Some cases stay with you forever. That was one of them. We met dozens of doctors, Margaret continued, but there was one person we never forgot. She pointed directly at me. Her. The room became even quieter. If Dr. Carter hadn't intervened when she did, my husband wouldn't be standing here tonight. Someone near the back gasped. My mother blinked. Once, twice, then 3 times, as though her brain refused to process what she was hearing. Margaret smiled through tears. You sat with me at 3 a.m. I remembered. She had been crying in a hospital hallway. Terrified. Alone. Her children hadn't arrived yet. Her husband was still in surgery. She had looked like she might collapse. I had spent 10 minutes talking to her between emergencies, not because it was required, because she needed someone. You told me not to give up hope. The ballroom remained silent. You explained every procedure. Margaret laughed softly. I think I asked the same questions 20 times. You did. A few people smiled. Margaret laughed again. And you answered all 20 times. Charles nodded. You stayed at the hospital long after your shift ended. I shrugged. That's what doctors do. No, his voice became firm. That's what extraordinary doctors do. My mother looked physically uncomfortable. Good. For the first time all evening, I wasn't the one feeling small. Then Rebecca suddenly spoke. Wait. She looked stunned. You're that Dr. Carter? I frowned. What do you mean? Rebecca laughed in disbelief. Oh my God. She turned toward Daniel. Daniel, tell me you're seeing this. Daniel looked equally shocked. What exactly is happening? Rebecca stared at me. My fiancé is a resident physician. I nodded. Okay. He talks about a Dr. Carter constantly. Now I was confused. There are several Dr. Carters. No, Rebecca shook her head. Not cardiac surgery. My stomach dropped. Uh-oh, I knew where this was going. And I didn't like attention. Never had. You're the youngest chief of cardiothoracic surgery in the hospital's history. The room exploded into whispers. My mother's face went pale. Actually pale. Not embarrassed. Not uncomfortable, pale, as though someone had suddenly drained the color from her body. Daniel looked at me. Wait, then at Rebecca, then back at me. No. Rebecca nodded. Yes. Daniel's eyes widened. The Dr. Evelyn Carter? I sighed. There it was, the thing I had spent years trying to keep separate from family gatherings, work, recognition, status, because my family never cared. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Or at least I used to. My mother suddenly laughed, a nervous laugh. Well, Evelyn never talks about work, because whenever I tried, you interrupted me. I didn't say it aloud, but the thought was there. Margaret looked surprised. She never told you? Told us what? My mother's voice sounded strained. Margaret blinked. That she's one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in Illinois. Dead silence. Somewhere across the room, a fork hit a plate. Clink. Nobody reacted. Everyone was staring at my mother. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered 29 years of criticism. 29 years of comparisons. 29 years of hearing how Lily was prettier, kinder, more elegant, more feminine, more successful, even while I was earning medical degrees, even while I was publishing research, even while I was performing surgeries that saved lives. Nothing had ever been enough. Apparently tonight was different. Margaret continued speaking. I recognized her immediately. She smiled. She's been featured in medical journals. Now my mother looked like she wanted the floor to open beneath her. Charles nodded. Several times. Rebecca laughed. My fiancé practically worships her. Oh, please don't say that. I'm serious, she looked delighted. He calls you a legend, I groaned. That's ridiculous. It absolutely isn't. The guests laughed. For the first time all evening, the laughter wasn't directed at me. My mother stood frozen, watching, listening, realizing, and perhaps understanding something she had never understood before. The daughter she spent decades dismissing wasn't invisible. She wasn't mediocre. She wasn't the family embarrassment. Outside those family walls, people respected her, admired her, trusted her. Then something happened that surprised everyone, including me. Margaret walked forward and hugged me, tightly. The room watched. I never properly thanked you. I stood there awkwardly. Doctors don't usually get hugged at engagement parties, especially not by strangers. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. Her eyes filled with tears. My grandchildren still have their grandfather because of you. That hit harder than I expected. Much harder. Because people rarely see what happens after surgery. They see doctors, hospitals, charts, numbers. They don't see birthdays that continue, anniversaries that happen, families that stay together, lives that keep moving forward. Sometimes this was the only reminder we got, why we sacrificed everything, why we missed holidays, why we worked 80-hour weeks, why we kept going. Margaret squeezed my hand. Then she turned toward the crowd. I think everyone here deserves to know who Dr. Carter really is. Oh no. Absolutely not. I knew that look. She was about to tell stories. I hated stories, especially stories about me. But it was already too late. Charles smiled. Should we tell them about the award? My heart immediately sank. Please don't. Margaret grinned. Oh, we absolutely should. My mother's head snapped toward them. What award? Charles stared at her. The surprise on his face was genuine. You don't know? For the second time that evening, my mother couldn't answer. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one feeling embarrassed. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The entire ballroom seemed frozen. My mother stood motionless. Charles Whitmore looked genuinely confused. You really didn't know? He asked again. My mother swallowed. No, one word, barely audible. Margaret stared at her. You didn't know your daughter received the National Excellence in Cardiothoracic Surgery Award last year? Silence. You didn't know she leads one of the most successful surgical teams in the state? Silence. You didn't know hospitals across the country invite her to train surgeons? The silence became unbearable. My mother looked at me. For the first time that evening, she wasn't looking at me with criticism. She wasn't looking at me with disappointment. She was looking at me like she was seeing a stranger, a person she had never bothered to know. And the truth was, she hadn't. For years, she never asked. Not really. She asked whether I was working too much, whether I was still single, whether I planned to have children, whether I could attend family events. But she never asked what I had accomplished, never asked what I loved, never asked what I had sacrificed, never asked who I had become, because she had already decided who I was. And once people make that decision, they stop looking. Margaret slowly turned toward the guests. Then she said something that changed the entire room. I've spent the last 7 months telling everyone I know about the woman who saved my husband's life. She smiled at me. And tonight I walked into this party expecting to meet the family who raised her. The smile disappeared. Instead, I watched them humiliate her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words landed like stones, because everyone had witnessed it. The comments, the jokes, the insults disguised as humor, the dismissive introductions, there was no denying it. The room had seen everything. My mother's face crumpled slightly. Then my father finally spoke. For the first time all evening. For the first time in years. Patricia. His voice was quiet, tired. I think she's right. My mother's eyes widened. My father looked at me, and suddenly he looked older than I had ever seen him. I should have said something years ago. The room remained silent. I watched it happen. His voice shook. Every birthday, every holiday, every family dinner. He looked down, and I said nothing. Something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something. Because for the first time in my life, someone was telling the truth. My father looked directly at me. I'm sorry. The words hit harder than all the praise, because I had waited my entire life to hear them. Not from strangers, not from colleagues, from him. I felt tears sting my eyes, and I hated crying in public. My mother suddenly stepped forward. Evelyn. I looked at her. The entire room watched. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For years she had always known exactly what to say. Tonight she couldn't find the words. Finally she whispered, I didn't know. I nodded. I know. And I meant it. She truly didn't know, because she never cared enough to learn. Those are not the same thing. The difference matters. Tears appeared in her eyes. I thought. She stopped, then tried again. I thought Lily needed more support. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was sad. I know. That had always been the justification. Lily needed help. Lily needed encouragement. Lily needed attention. And somehow that always meant there was none left for me. My mother looked devastated, as though she were only now realizing what 30 years of small choices had created. Then Lily suddenly walked toward me. My little sister, the golden child, the favorite, the one who was never supposed to understand. She wrapped her arms around me and started crying. I'm sorry, I froze, then hugged her back. You have nothing to apologize for. Yes, I do. She pulled away. Her makeup was ruined. I should have stopped her. Her voice cracked. Years ago, I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw something I had missed for years. Guilt. She had known. Maybe not everything, but enough to understand, enough to feel ashamed, enough to suffer in her own way. I squeezed her hand. This isn't your fault. And for once, it wasn't. The room remained quiet. Then Daniel stepped beside Lily. He looked at me and smiled. I think I'm the luckiest guy in the room. I laughed. Why? Because if Lily turned out half as strong as her sister, I definitely chose the right woman. For the first time all night, the laughter that followed felt warm. Not cruel, not mocking. Warm, the kind of laughter families are supposed to share. Hours later, the engagement party finally ended. Guests slowly left. The ballroom emptied. The flowers remained. The music faded. And eventually I found myself standing outside beneath the evening sky. Alone, at least for a moment. The lake stretched into darkness. The air felt cool against my skin. Then I heard footsteps behind me. My mother. I didn't turn around. For a while neither of us spoke. Finally she said, You know what hurts the most? I looked at the water. What? Her voice broke. I spent years telling everyone how proud I was of Lily. She paused. And tonight strangers told me all the reasons I should have been proud of you. The honesty surprised me. I turned toward her. Tears streamed down her face. Not dramatic tears, not manipulative tears, real ones. The kind people cry when they finally see themselves clearly and don't like what they find. I can't change the past, she whispered. No. I know. We stood there quietly. Then she asked the question I never expected. Do you think someday you'll forgive me? I looked at her for a long moment. Then I answered honestly. I don't know. She nodded, because it was the only truthful answer. Forgiveness isn't a gift someone earns by asking. It's something that grows, slowly, or not at all. But for the first time, the door wasn't completely closed, and maybe that was enough. A year later, Lily got married. I stood beside her. Not because anyone expected me to. Because I wanted to. My mother never made another joke at my expense, never introduced me as the family disappointment again, never pretended my life was insignificant. Some wounds never disappear completely, but they stop bleeding. And sometimes that's what healing looks like. Not perfect reconciliation, not dramatic revenge, just truth, finally spoken aloud. As for me, the next Monday morning I walked back into the operating room, put on my gloves, reviewed a patient's chart, and got back to work. Because while my family had finally discovered who I was, the people whose lives depended on me had known all along. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough.